Go. So we might throw up a little video to get started. We did put that together over the weekend, and I noticed we have a few attendees here that probably aren't too familiar with what we do. So hopefully that explainer video helps. But it's not the point of today. The point of today is to have a chat to a good mate of mine, local farmer and partner at. Hang on, I do have a whole bunch of notes here. Partner and director of Terra Protein Equity Partners, which is an agricultural investor and advisory company founded in Edinburgh with ag tech and production investments in Chile, Africa, and the US. Hamish Webb. So welcome, Hamish.
Thanks, Sam. Great to be here with you.
Super stoked to have you on, mate.
Likewise.
We'll just do a sound check. Can everyone hear me? Okay, that's all good. Great, and hopefully you can see us as well. So, yeah, the point of getting Hamish on today is. I'll let Hamish talk about his background and experience in a second. I met Hamish probably 2 years ago here in Armidale. When we first started, we work out of the lovely Smart Region Incubator at the UNE, University of New England. And, Hamish was one of the first guys I met really into ag tech and really passionate about his soil as well. So he had a lot of thoughts on FarmLab and, throughout our journey, he's given a lot of feedback. In fact, we did the first case study, the first FarmLab case study on Hamish's farm with Hamish and Precision Pastures. So, Hamish, tell us a bit about yourself and your operation at Mindbar, and a bit about your background first, because I think people find, what I'm most interested in is that you're sort of got that investment finance background. You've come into farming, so your picture of the world is quite unique.
Well, thanks, mate. It's been a lot of fun. I guess what will probably be the most boring part of your webinar is a little bit of background, but I think it's important for a little bit of context. So, I grew up on a sheep and cattle farm near Longreach in Western Queensland, and my family is still there. But I went away and and worked in corporate finance industry for almost 10 years. And ended up in Edinburgh in Scotland working for a small agricultural private equity firm. And after a few years in that, it became a company called Terra Protein Equity Partners, which as you mentioned, I'm a partner of. And we effectively look for leading ag tech or ag production businesses, usually involved in animal protein production. And companies that are looking to grow. Usually by growing, they're looking to expand into new markets or raise capital, often equity capital, and that's what we do. And in the event that we do a good job, we become a shareholder in that business. It's been a lot of fun, but being a country boy and my wife's a country girl, we always wanted to get back to the land. And when we returned to Australia, we chose Armidale, and we have a little property on the western side of Armidale. And I get to work on that and to come into town and be a partner of Terra Protein Equity Partners. So it's the best of both worlds.
So it's absolutely fascinating. I'd be keen to hear a bit more about, and we've spoken about this in the past. You could just talk about the Dolly the Sheep.
Sure.
In terms of that.
Sure. So it's a little over 20 years ago that the University of Edinburgh's Roslin Institute created Dolly the Sheep, the world's first cloned mammal.
Yep.
As breakthrough and as innovative as that creation was, they didn't really commercialise it much. And like a lot of research institutes, their very existence is predicated by their grant funding that they receive. And based in the UK is not uncommon. They have been, their grant funding has been reducing. And we approached them, or they approached us in about 2014 and said, we just can't go on like this. We need to come up with a new funding model for our research. And so we suggested that they create a company called Roslin Technologies, which actually produces products and services, not just research, but takes them to commercialization and sell those products and services and create their own revenue stream, which they can then put back into research. And
so I guess the key question here is, how many dollies do you have across your farm?
None that are living, the little teddy bear that my son plays with, top Dolly teddy bear sheep. But
an army of clones across across Minbar at the moment. No, tell us a bit about Minbar. So, it's not a sheep operation. Oh no, it is actually.
It is.
Sorry,
sheep
it used to be cattle.
Yeah. So it's about 25 minutes west of Armidale. And it's lighter country than the traditional New England. People think of New England, they think of very heavy black basalt soils. Ours is very much lighter, typically a granite and an ironstone soil. But that actually suited us because we wanted to run sheep and more opportunistically run cattle as well. We also do a little bit of cropping, a little bit of fodder cropping, but we only moved there about less than 2 years ago. And, it struck me at the time when we were looking at it. I asked to see a bit of soil testing or to get an understanding of the soil. And all I received was, the history of fertiliser application, not where it went, but just the tonnage that was put on according to the notebook of the previous owner, who was obviously, he could have told me anything. And then just a little a PDF of a soil test that was done, no idea what location it was done, the various test results, and then a handwritten note down the bottom. These look okay, give me a call to discuss from his agronomist. So I had no idea what we were working with.
That's fantastic. So how many of us have been in that position? You get handed over the, it's like any sort of real estate purchase as well. You kind of get handed it over with the minimal amount of information because, they don't want to ruin their negotiating position in terms of, the value of the property and the operation as well. So that I remember seeing that report. I was pretty gobsmacked and, fortunately we were working on FarmLab at the time. So,
very fortunately.
So look,
don't
do this again. So, okay. So that's really interesting. Just being given some fairly abstract information about the soil. So what have you done since? As in, how have you started to, I guess, uncover what soil is there? Maybe tell us a bit about your strategy, first of all, when you came in. The history of the property was a cattle operation. You introduced sheep and wanted to crop. So, what is your strategy there moving forward, and what are you looking at doing soil wise and just more broadly?
Very originally, it was a sheep farm, as is common for a lot of now cattle farms across the country. They used to run a lot of sheep.
Yep.
But about 30 years ago, they converted to cattle only, and they were background in cattle for feedlots. So the infrastructure was fairly run down. The cattle were very selective in their grazing. They weren't cell grazed at all. Yep. So there was a bit of a weed problem. But as far as the soils go, I really, apart from identifying some of the sweeter country by what was growing there and where the cattle seemed to prefer previously, because you could identify cattle pads, I really had no idea what we were working with. So from the beginning, I wanted to get a good base level of understanding, starting from the beginning, to know what 0 point is. Yep. You can only improve if you know what your starting base is.
That's right. You can't manage what you don't measure. Is the old adage. Yeah. So we were a part of that initial sort of measurement phase where we went out probably a year and a half ago now, so maybe a bit over a year ago, just to take some samples, and that was to help you baseline the farm and the soil across the farm. So since then, since the baselining activity, what have you done since? Have you remeasured, and how have you found the information you gathered from that first activity to today?
Okay.
Have a look.
Well, going back to the very first samples, I did make some inquiries about how to go about the soil sampling, and there was quite a different service provided from a chemical reseller an ag input provider, let's call them that, and most country towns have got someone there that'll sell you chemical or fertilizer. They, over the phone said, "Oh, you live out that way, you'll have a pH issue and probably low sulfur, and just buy this.
Just do
perfect product for you."
No testing, no.
didn't even want to do testing. Then I had a couple that would sort of come out quickly and just jump the fence and put a bit of dirt in a bag. Then there were some that would do a fairly detailed transection of most of my paddocks, and it was basically it was a data-driven exercise, but the paddock is this wide. We will put down 8 samples across there. And then there was the FarmLab, or the FarmLab and Precision Pastures process was we will use all technology available to us to understand the soil types and the soil type zones to then work out the survey or the sample plan. And that was, for me, that was the piece of the pie that was missing. Instead of putting 8 samples, a transection across this paddock, you were able to tell me, well, clearly you've got 2 distinct zones, this little 5 acres here and the other 120 acres here that's completely different soil type. So I only needed two samples in that case.
That's good. So let's talk about the value of that moving forward. So, I mean, it's your farm, Hamish, the variability. You understand that, one paddock has, a huge variability in soil type. You have a lot of granite on your property as well. So it's about, what is it about? Why understand that variability? Why are you looking for, what does that give you in terms of, helping you manage your operation?
Okay. I think it can probably help my profitability or help my business in 3 ways. One, it saves me money. For that example before, I'm doing 2 sample holes instead of 8 to understand my soil. When I know the soil, the soil type on a map, it helps with my variable rate application. For example, with lime, I know that this whole zone, based on your mapping and that from EM38 surveys from Precision Pastures, we know that area has got a greater conductivity. Therefore, I can use less lime to reduce my pH issue. So there's those 2 savings. The third one, which really only occurred to me after several conversations with you, was the benefit of my bank account for my soils and what that could do for the value of my asset over time. Obviously, if we were to sell it one day, and that may not be our intention, but let's say we were, I would have something far more substantial than just that, that PDF handwritten note. Here's what we did.
The scanned photocopied sort of PDF of the soil test results. That's right. Here you go. Future buyer of this property. We've done the right thing. You will have quite unique here. I think there are. It's not common that these resources are available just yet, but a full history of your soil and the changes in that soil over time. And so from that first baselining activity we did last year, that's your baseline. But again, there were some soil samples taken this year as part of that EM38 survey. They've gone into your account as well, and so you'll be able to compare and contrast. All right, well, this paddock last year was this paddock this year is this. Take that to the bank. Take that to the bank and say, look, I've improved my pastures.
Look, why not?
My valuation.
Why not? As part of our valuations, I do actually have something now that I can show. This has improved my pH level. I'm more likely to have my clover to be rhizoming, so I'm probably going to get more production. If I can demonstrate that I've gone from 6,000 dry sheep equivalent to 8,000, that's a tangible, valuable increase in my valuation. Now that might help with my loan, my interest rate, other savings. So
I guess in the finance world, when you're valuing companies, as you do, you look at a financial report and balance sheet and some of the key drivers of profit to assess the valuation of that business. So, it's just interesting thinking about, well, why don't we do the same in agriculture? Why is soil not part of that balance sheet at the end of the day? I know we've got a lot of our attendees here today that are looking at that and are looking for sort of tools and ways to do that. And that's certainly what drives us at FarmLab, to help support that, because when it comes to understanding the full, not just the profitability, but the risk of your operation, if you're not factoring into account your soil and how it's changing over time, it's a real struggle.
I liken it a little bit to the introduction of estimated birth values, highly data-driven analytics in livestock production.
No, okay, interesting. This is fascinating. I have no idea what estimated birth. Not a cattle farmer. Sorry, guys.
you have two ways of assessing. Essentially, it's very simplified. But you have two ways of assessing an animal. You phenotypically assess it. You look at what its features are, its feet, its body shape, its head, its the actual bits and pieces that you have been taught that demonstrate a quality animal. Or you have genetic information, which is genetic markers which can say an animal is a prolific breeder, or it has excellent weight gain in the first 200 days, or its progeny will be low birth weight. And they all have different various levels of accuracy, but they're getting very accurate now. So you can look at an animal and you can just make your assessment that way, or make it on a database, a data-driven decision. Exactly the same could happen with assessing properties. You can just have a walk around and kick the fence post and see what you think, or you could actually look at the data provided via, for example, a FarmLab map, and actually look at what's happened to the soils, what has been put into them, any deficiencies, what are your roadblocks or your bottlenecks to get that production to where it should be.
Yeah, fantastic. That's what a great analogy, Hamish. That's really interesting. And one of the things we spoke about last time that we had a chat out at Lion Bar was carbon. Mind touching on carbon? What are you and I think this is another area. I mean, we are very, very big on. We have a very big focus on FarmLab. Part of the reason we started FarmLab was to help farmers better manage soil fertility. One of the key underlying, I guess, attributes there is soil carbon. There's enough scientific evidence out there to show increases in soil carbon has massive increases in soil moisture retention, nutrients, holding capacity, all that sort of stuff. So let's just maybe segue into carbon for a second. This is an area that I think is getting more, I guess, visibility, especially here in New England, but even across Australia with the Emissions Reduction Fund. And there's some, and look, for the audience's sake, we'll send out a summary of these notes, including what we're about to discuss now around Emissions Reduction Fund projects, and some more information about how to enter those and how to access those. So the obvious thing there being in ERF projects is that it can provide another stream of revenue for the farm business, and something we've spoken about in the past. So let's just talk now about maybe carbon and your goals with carbon and what you've found to date across the property, maybe from those initial early days around soil carbon to today, and how your thinking's changed.
Well, the first thing I'd say is I really am no expert on carbon farming. I mean, I've only just, I'm very interested and learning. I'm just trying to soak up as much as I can. What I know is that the Emission Reduction Fund, which has been increased, it sets the industry at a total potential value of almost $6 billion. And we hear about the potential of carbon trading and the setting of caps on major emitters, and their only option being able to buy carbon credits. So that sort of sets in place a potential market. So
this is interesting. I think just for comparison, the livestock industry across Australia is valued at $11 billion. So to have an entirely new industry market just stand up to be worth worth half of that of the livestock industry, more than some other agricultural sectors. That is, there is huge potential there. That is really exciting.
It really is, and so that sort of got me to want to look at it a bit more. And people in the agricultural industry, as much as any industry, they talk to one another, and we started to observe that other people in the ag industry were being involved in it.
Yep.
And there were previously two major or two ways that agricultural producers were involved in the creation of carbon credits that I was previously aware of. One was what's called savanna burning, which is usually in Northern Australia. My understanding, in very simple terms, is doing a cold weather fire control burn or fuel reduction burn versus a hot one, and the difference in emission there, that difference in emission can create a carbon credit, an ACCU, an Australian carbon credit unit. The second method is revegetation, and this is fairly straightforward. Removing or changing a land use that now promotes increased vegetation, and this became quite popular in southwestern Queensland. There's large areas there that are known as sort of mulga lands. Mulga is an edible protein rich tree which is grows very well in those dry climates. That's not applicable to us down here, but suddenly people started talking about soil carbon farming, and that's what got me interested. The main reason I'm interested in that is because it does something that we're fundamentally, you receive the credits for doing something that we want to do anyway, and that's increasing your carbon levels in the soil. Revegetation is, not only is it not applicable to here, but you have to take your stock off the farm. In soil carbon farming, you may well increase your stocking levels. You may increase your production to get more carbon levels. And that's what's very much excited us, is by doing what we want to do anyway and potentially increasing our production, we could also be creating Australian carbon credit units for sale.
That extra form of revenue we spoke about, isn't it? That's absolutely brilliant.
A fourth commodity. Yeah, exactly.
I know we're going to have attendees with questions on this, so we'll save questions till the end. But hopefully Stephen Todd from Volt Farmers on the line. He's done a bit of work on his own property to generate carbon credits and do a few other things. There's some big people, some large players in the consulting space. We don't recommend any single consultant, so we'll let farmers who are on the line do their own research around that. We just say, treat it like a financial product, go out, do your research, find a consultant that works for you or a developer that works for you. There are some fantastic resources out there, like, I don't know if we've got Louisa on the line from Carbon Farmers of Australia that can support, give you access to more of the, more information around how to get into carbon credit projects. Now let's just come back to the soil samples you've taken. So, one of the questions we get asked quite a lot is, can I use the soil samples I've taken to enter into a soil carbon project? Fortunately, the answer is no, unless you are registered with a project developer or via a project developer. As with the government, as an ERF project, you can't use your existing soil information to act as the baselining activity for that carbon project. But, and there's a big but here, so where you measure soil carbon, it's a very statistical game. We're not going to go into it today. Again, this is probably a conversation you should have with your consultant or your agronomist. But what you can glean from your historic data is where you're likely to improve carbon the most. And I mean, I'm keen to get your thoughts on this in terms of just mine, but the soil tests that you've done, from what you know about the property, from being there today, have you got specific areas? And the other thing here is that it's not, improving carbon isn't just a matter of throwing some more fertilizer out there or some organic fertilizer out there and just getting improvements. There's quite a bit of management required to actually get increases in soil carbon over time to benefit from carbon credits. It's not all, it's not all magical $6 billion market. So, so where you do that it's got to be quite strategic, right? Like you don't want to chuck out just organic fertilizer over every single paddock you've got and just hope for improvement. You want to kind of be bit more surgical about it. Can you tell us about your thoughts on that and what you've measured to date around?
Yeah, sure. So we conducted our measurements early last year sometime. And the interesting thing is I wasn't even thinking carbon farming. I hadn't even entered my mind at that stage.
None of us were, yeah.
But coincidentally, it was one of the results that came back, which is a fairly common one, carbon content. And so as I started to research a bit more about carbon farming, I thought, you know, I've actually got some fairly unproductive parts of land. I'd be happy to fence them or change their production to use them for the generation of Australian carbon credit units and make some production out of them that way. What was really interesting was when I went back through the results from the testing, some of my least productive country actually had very high levels or you know, higher than some of my other farming areas, and particularly my arable country was very low in carbon, very low. And in actual fact, the opposite is true. So the more productive country, the arable country where I grow my oat crops and where I'm looking to improve, that's where I have low carbon and I could increase it significantly.
You know, this is good. This is good because I mean, what we're looking for, what you'd be looking for in a carbon project is, you know, the increase. It's increasing your soil carbon by 1 to maybe more percent. I mean, 1% is probably probably what we're looking at in New England with the climate, unless climate change hits and we start growing bananas here in the next 5 years. But you know, so that's important because you don't want to, again, bang for your buck. You don't want to start trying to improve those areas of your farm that have high carbon, probably due to, you know, them being the native. That's probably, you know, those areas, and I know the areas you're talking about, the big back paddock, down south, they're probably closer to the sort of the native, you know, the native levels of soil organic carbon. So that's why they're a bit higher. They haven't been grazed as much, and you know,
exactly right.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So we're on 12 o'clock now. We thought we might open up to questions. So we've got two options. If you want to chuck them in the chat, and then we might get Florian to read them out. Or you can just shout out and rudely interrupt, which I'm more than happy with because I do it all the time. So so fire away if there's anything out there. Yep.
Any questions so far?
Let's check the chat there. Stick them in the chat if you've got them.
This might mean we can rabbit on for a little bit longer.
We can always rabbit on. Florian, is there anything you want to hear a bit more of?
Well, so you mentioned the strategic advantage that you gain over time when you have a look on your carbon levels and see that there are areas, you mentioned that, Hamish, that there are areas where you didn't expect carbon to improve, but actually did. But what would be the next steps for you then to initialize a carbon project? How does that work for you? What is the strategic approach, and also what are the actual steps then?
Yeah. So initially, we went to agronomists and we asked them for their view on carbon farming. I guess a lot of them were at the same stage as us. They were just trying to understand and work it out themselves. And there was a fairly varying degree of enthusiasm for it. One of them said, look, 90% of the carbon you create is determined by the rainfall, so you can't do much yourself to change it. But what we ended up doing was we did, as Sam suggested, you know, we contacted advisors, we contacted agents or, you know, I guess the brokers that are involved in the industry, and we researched how do they create projects, how do they remunerate themselves, is there a fee for service, is there a commission based on the sale proceeds of our units, Do they want to lock us into some sort of upfront contract? How does all of that work?
Yeah.
And then we did actually get some success with one of our, with our agronomist, Precision Pastures, who you mentioned before. They are undertaking some trials and asked if we'd be interested to be a part of it, to basically look at our country, some designated areas, and to determine the feasibility of a carbon farming project on our farm. So to answer your question, we put ourselves out there to learn more, to seek an advisor or seek a provider, and we talked very closely to our agronomist.
Yeah, very good.
Questions in the chat.
I got a question in the chat from Simon, and this is about more about plans, how to build soil carbon. So what are the methods there? What are you using, animals and time, and what are other methods to improve carbon in the soil? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Wire and water, right? That's what we were talking about just before.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it.
I mean, especially in this climate, in this region.
I guess it is dependent upon a few things: your climate, your existing soil types. But for us, we're looking at a fairly holistic approach to cell grazing. So our livestock management. So we need to look at our wire and water, but also potentially changing our species. Our grass species, and to put them a bit more understand. So our traditional natives, we're looking at rotating them into more of a subtropical, with some greater, a much greater biomass production. And with cell grazing, there's a fairly simple adage. You want them to eat a third, trample a third, leave a third. And so if we're increasing our biomass production, and we're putting it back into the soil through heavy movement and repeated movement, hopefully that'll give us the carbon improvement.
There are a few resources online. There's one from New South Wales DPI, which is a really great resource around, what the biggest bang for buck is in terms of management approaches to increasing soil carbon. So we'll put some of those in our resource pack and summary pack after this. So we'll get those out to the attendees straight after this. Certainly that New South Wales DPI one is one that comes to mind. It's it's got some very good information based on some good scientific studies around what management practices are likely to increase soil carbon the most. Unfortunately for a lot of, fortunately, I think the biggest bang for buck is converting a cropped paddock into a grazed paddock. But it doesn't help people. It doesn't help that. I understand it doesn't help most grazed livestock owners in the region.
I think
that
we're going to learn more and more about this. I think as more projects happen, I've heard a lot about spreading of manure. That's couldn't get much more carbon rich.
Yeah, that's right.
Organic matter.
Yeah.
So we have the ability to do that, whether it's chicken or cattle. So we're going to have a look at that as well. We do have some cropping areas that have obviously just been dryland cropping. So whether we could look at maybe rotating them to a more permanent pasture, and then cell grazing. So rather than repeatedly sort of flogging the pastures and taking that carbon out, putting it back in for at least a period of sort of 5 to 7 years, maybe 10 years.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Hamish. I got another question here from Harriet. The soil quality tracking is obviously beneficial for both farmers and the wider economy in the long term. Is this something that the government would ever show interest in subsidizing or supporting through other means to make the tech more accessible to more farmers in Australia wide?
Yeah, really good question.
Great question.
So I might start and get your thoughts on this, Hamish. So our view at FarmLab is that
of course they should,
and we also want to make our tools as accessible to any farmer out there as possible. I mean, we see ourselves as a bank account for soil. We've actually just undergone a pretty rapid change in our pricing model to make it a bit more suitable a bit more accessible for that exact reason. So I can talk about our pricing model later. Basically, we'll try to make it as cheaper than a Netflix subscription. So FarmLab now costs $15 a month, billed annually at $180 a year to the farmer. And then through that, all of that soil information is banked. We just need to work with the agronomist to make sure it's all kept there nice and safe. Now, having said, the other part of that question was government subsidies. So there is now talk. I don't know if it's official yet, but the government are now looking at subsidising entry into ERF carbon projects by providing the farmer with up to a $5,000 subsidy for the cost of baselining their soil carbon for that project. Now, it sounds like a lot, and for most $5,000 is $5,000 is a lot of money. However, the baselining activity itself still costs in the vicinity of $40,000 to $50,000. Given the size that you're looking at, 40 to 50,000 would probably be 200 hectares plus, maybe 150 hectares plus. But certainly subsidising 10% of that cost is a good starting point. Certainly, I think they could go further and maybe not just subsidise, but maybe provide upfront loans to farmers that want to get into these projects. There's a whole lot of activity going on at the moment. There is a soil carbon working group working on this right now. I think Stephen Warnkin is heading this up and providing all this feedback to the government on that. So, yep, I'll hand over to Hamish because he can give you a bit of an insight from the grower's perspective in terms of costs and what you're seeing today.
Yeah, a really good question. Let me put it this way, I don't think we'd be waiting to see government, if there is a government subsidy, because who knows when that might be. And I guess personally, I think that those that are willing to have a go at it early, before costs of benchmarking or baselining can come down, and let's assume that it will come down as people get more familiar with the protocol. There are more people able to undertake the baseline survey testing. Let's assume that cost will get cheaper. By that time, those that have committed early will hopefully be generating credits, and they might have an early
there's
advantage.
Something else to this as well, which is, if you're measuring your carbon for the first time when you're baselining, it's not too late, but you really want to be collecting, you want to collect that soil information now so that back to Hamish's point, where you're likely to improve carbon, but you're also likely to know what's going to work on your property and where it's going to work. So one of the things we sort of have spoken about is the benefit of, looking at the changes in carbon and maybe looking at that snapshot of where is my carbon good, where's it bad. But if you've been analysing that, not even analysing it, but just looking at it year after year and saying, all right, well, last year I did this to this paddock, didn't really have this year my carbon readings are this, it didn't really have much of an effect. When it comes time for you to enter into a project, an ERF project, or even if you've got a relatively small operation, less than 100 hectares, you're still well poised to then actually say, look, I know what works on my property in terms of increasing soil carbon. And there's something to that too.
Yeah, that's a good point. The last thing I'd say, who knows if it ever would be something that the government would subsidise. Again, this is just a personal viewpoint, but subsidies, I think they can disrupt the market equilibrium, and subsidies that might have been installed initially for a good intention can have bad outcomes. You might fundamentally increase the price because the amount of service providers that come into it soak up that subsidy, as has happened with freight subsidies that effectively put $70 onto the price of hay.
First homeowners grant.
Homeowners grant, yeah.
So
now that doesn't have to happen here. It might be structured in a better way, but what I would prefer to see is market-driven incentives to bring down the cost or help with the cost or take over the cost of baselining, such as if the big emitters, I don't know who, I won't name them, but let's say there is company X that knows that it's going to need a significant amount of carbon credits in the future. why wouldn't they commit to funding my or a group of farmers in the area for the baseline survey, for the cost of that, for the right, perhaps the first right to acquire those credits, or perhaps an option to acquire those credits in the future
at a set rate.
At a set rate. So I might be giving up some of the upside in what I could be selling them for, but I don't have to fork out the cost of the baseline. Something like that, I'd probably prefer than a subsidy, I think.
Yeah, better market incentives. I like it.
That's very interesting. Thanks, guys. I have another question here from Simon. Hamish, can you talk about the value of soil carbon as an income stream to investors that you work with at TerraProtein? I think you already started mentioning it, but can you get a little bit closer to that? Is there something you can add to this?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Simon. We don't actually have, TerraProtein doesn't actually have any live carbon credit projects. However, we do have a substantial pork business in Chile, which has to deal with its waste, its pork slurry waste. And they've identified that they are potentially able to generate carbon credits. Unquantified at this stage, but they're basically, they're allowed to put 2 tons of waste per acre in Chile. That's the current standards. They're adopting not just international standards, they're not just European, but best in class, which is Danish pork waste removal, and it's about 140 kilograms of waste per acre. And they think that difference could be able to generate a credit. But to give you some numbers, Simon, and these are not my numbers, but I did see this in a presentation recently in Australia about soil carbon farming, that on current market prices for Australian carbon credit units, on 1 hectare, if you're increasing the carbon content by 1%, you can generate sufficient ACCUs to be worth around $15,000. Now, that got everyone very excited, $15,000 per hectare per 1% that you've increased. But what's not clear is how long, how expensive it will be to get that 1% increase. And that's what we don't know yet.
A big challenge in how to do it. I think there's one other thing to that question as well, which we've been thinking about in FarmLab, which is, I mean, that's absolutely critical, but it means that there's a minimum size of the farm that and we know this today, that you kind of need to have in order to enter a carbon project and be able to profit from it and manage risk. How do we incentivize the small, or how do we give programs and give assistance to the smaller farm holders? The hobby farmers, the farmers with less than 100 hectares to enter these projects, or not even enter projects, but benefit from improving soil carbon. So there is one other thing, and one other little thing we're looking at doing in FarmLab is that we want to work with your buyers. So if you're selling produce to Woolworths and you're storing your soil carbon data in FarmLab, to give them a tool to prove the provenance, but also not just the provenance, but your means of improving, or that you've actually increased soil carbon, to then sell your product as a carbon neutral, carbon negative product. And that's something we don't think about all the time, but something that is becoming more and more popular, or not popular, but it's starting to get out there more as, consumers want carbon neutral, carbon negative foods and produce. So if we can support you in providing, a tick of approval to show that you've increased soil carbon when you were producing that, those head of cattle, I think that could also be a really valuable income stream in attaching that premium to your product. And
that's very interesting. A producer recently that I was speaking to told me that they were doing a project and they were actually looking at selling branded ACCUs.
Fantastic.
So not just vanilla Australian carbon credit units. They were doing their own branded version.
Yep.
And it just got me thinking. they were looking for a premium on just the current market, and they said, why not? You know, in future, you know, I don't know, an airline magazine, you could be reading about their program to keep their carbon neutral footprint. And one of the projects they've invested in is this soil sequestration project, or revegetation, where they're revegetating with eucalypts in a koala habitat. You know, brand value, goodwill, just exploding all over the place. But I thought that was very interesting, a branded Accu.
Yeah, fantastic.
All right. Yeah, I don't have any new questions here. Is there any other thing you would like to add? I might have another question.
Anyone want to shout out? Anyone got anything they want to shout out?
No, yeah, I got another one here. The Soil Key project in Droin, which created the world's first Accus, make about 10 tons per hectare at $16 Accu.
Yep.
It's from Stephen Todd. Yeah, so that's another ad.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, good.
Thanks,
I'm glad you're on, Steve. I did mention Volks Farmer before, so yes, thank you. And you know, great product there. We don't recommend any products, but certainly the Soil Key's been got some, you know, certain evidence. You know, there's definitely some evidence there from the work that AgriProve have done. Yeah, great. Any other comments? I think so. Shout out, but I mean, thank you very much for your time, Hamish. I really appreciate it. I think I've learned a whole bunch of stuff here. If anyone has any other questions, look, we'll send you out a bit of an information pack. Being a bit, you know, very focused on soil carbon today, but you know, there's also just the benefit of actually you know, just banking that soil information for you know, to understand the management, your impact of management practices on your soil fertility and adding to the farm asset over the long run. You've done a really great job at explaining that, and yeah, looking forward to heading out to Minebar for some future sampling.
Can't wait, Sam. We've got plenty of it for you.
Wonderful. All right, well, you can get in touch with us at info@farmlab.com.au, or you know, you're welcome to trial software for free at www.farmlab.com.au, and yeah, look forward to hearing from you. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.